January 17, 1944. Just past midnight. The olive groves near the Gustav Line, Italy, were a world of shadow and whispered danger. Cold winter wind clawed at the hills, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant smoke. Stone terraces jutted from the slopes like broken spines of long-dead giants, their edges jagged in the moonlight. Every crease, every hollow seemed alive, hiding shapes that could either protect or kill. Private Tommy Reynolds crouched behind a low wall, rifle pressed to his chest, eyes scanning the darkness. At 16, he should have been chasing sunlight across Iowa fields, not stalking shadows among olive trees, tasked with protecting men older and far more experienced. His M1 Garand felt heavy in his hands, its cold steel biting through his gloves, each scratch and dent a testament to nights like this. The grove was quiet, too quiet. Silence has a way of lying in war. It masks danger, waiting to strike when least expected. Tommy's ears strained, catching every whisper of leaves, every faint scrape of stone beneath unseen feet. His breath came shallow, fogging in front of him. He imagined every shadow as an enemy soldier, every movement as a knife poised to strike. And then it happened. His fingers slipped. The M1 Garand clanged against the stone wall. The sound echoed across terraces, bouncing from grove to grove. Tommy froze, heart hammering, breath catching in his throat. Movement answered. Shadows darker than the night itself began sliding between terraces, crawling on hands and knees with deliberate precision. Tommy's stomach twisted. His mind screamed, "This isn't wildlife." German Brandenburger commandos, elite, silent killers drawn into position for a night ambush. Their eyes glinted faintly in the moonlight, knives and carbines adjusted. Every muscle, every movement was practiced to perfection. They were here to strike at Americans who believed the sector safe, and Tommy had just given them away. Protocol screamed at him to stay hidden, don't alert, observe, wait, but instinct roared louder. One thought consumed him, if I stay silent, they'll die. He raised his voice, barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to slice through the grove. Incoming, German right here. The grove erupted. Leaves shivered violently. Flares hissed from nearby positions, blooming into harsh white light. The faint murmur of men scrambling echoed faintly. Defensive positions were being manned. Tommy's mistake had become the only warning these soldiers might get. From the shadows, the commandos froze, realizing the surprise was gone. They pressed closer to the ground, weighing the risk of attack against their lost advantage. Tommy's heart raced as he peered into the darkness, every nerve alight. He could see the glimmer of eyes adjusting to the flares, hands tightening on rifles, the slight hesitation before action. Somewhere, a dog barked, small but deafening in the tension-choked air. Tommy's breaths came short and ragged, cold burning in his lungs. Every movement, every sound, felt amplified, magnified by fear. From up the hillside, a corporal shouted orders. Rifle bolts clicked, bayonets locked, boots shuffled over stone terraces. The Americans, alerted by a single boy's voice, were mobilizing with remarkable precision. Time, the one thing that mattered most in war, was being bought, second by second, by Tommy's instinct. And yet fear clung to him. The Germans were not defeated, only exposed. Their elite training meant hesitation could be deadly, and every decision made in the dark was a knife-edge balance. Tommy imagined the men who would have been caught unprepared. Faces he would never know, lives depending on a single choice he had made in terror and courage alike. The wind picked up, carrying the faint rumble of distant artillery, tugging at uniforms and nerves alike. Every rustle of leaves, every branch snapping underfoot, made his stomach coil tighter. Flashes of light from flares painted the grove in stark contrasts, long shadows, monstrous silhouettes, the glint of steel. Time slowed. The grove seemed to hold its breath. The Germans weighed their options, attack and risk exposure, or retreat and preserve the lives of their own. Tommy could almost see them calculating, silent yet deadly, muscles coiled like springs. And then it hit him, the reality of what he'd done. A boy, 16, untested, had changed the course of the night. One mistake, one slip of the hand, one voice above a whisper, yet it had been enough. Flares continued to hiss into the grove, painting stone walls and olive trees with harsh light. Shadows leapt across terraces. Every sound, radio crackle, shouted order, rifle bolt, carried urgency, alerting soldiers who had trusted reports instead of instinct. Tommy's chest ached, adrenaline and cold mingling into numb panic. The Germans pressed on, shifting silently, evaluating. Their rifles glinted, knives poised. The night was no longer a quiet witness. It was a living entity, pulsing with tension, anticipation, and danger. Tommy stayed low, feeling each heartbeat, each breath, each fraction of a second stretch into eternity. And then a pause. For a single heartbeat, the grove seemed frozen. The wind halted, the leaves stilled. Even Tommy's pulse, deafening in his ears, felt suspended. Somewhere deep in the darkness, a movement that did not belong to either side caught his attention. Something else, something unaccounted for, was entering the grove. The night was far from over. Tommy realized, in that frozen instant, that war was nothing more than a series of compressed choices. One sound, one instinct, one act of courage. That was all it took to save dozens of lives or doom them. The grove waited. The shadows moved. And somewhere, the first shots had yet to be fired. The flares cracked the night sky, spilling white-hot light across terraces and olive branches. Shadows leapt, stretched, and twisted in unnatural shapes. Soldiers stirred like ghosts, shaken from their cold, quiet patrols into immediate action. The air was thick with tension, the scent of sweat, gun oil, and winter damp biting at the lungs. Sergeant Henry Caldwell cursed under his breath clouding in the cold. "Positions, now, get the flares up and hold your lines." His voice was sharp, slicing through the night as men scrambled. Tommy, still pressed low against his stone wall, watched as older soldiers reacted with an efficiency born of countless drills, their training transforming panic into fluid motion. Rifle bolts clicked, bayonets extended, sandbags shifted, flare guns spat fire into the air, each hiss a call to arms. The soldiers' eyes darted, scanning terraces, groves, and shadows. Every footstep, every rustle of leaves was a possible threat. Tommy's chest heaved. His hands shook on the rifle, but he stayed low, watching. He saw Corporal James Avery sprint across the terrace, hurling flares into pockets of darkness. The beams cut through the grove like swords of light, revealing the olive trees' gnarled trunks, their leaves trembling under the wind. In the illuminated patches, rifles raised, eyes narrowed, soldiers took up defensive positions as if the moonlight itself guided their hands. The Brandenburger commandos pressed forward, adapting. The sudden exposure had forced them to abandon silence. Every step was measured, careful, but they were now reacting to American movement instead of dictating it. One soldier froze mid-crawl, chest pressed to the earth, eyes calculating escape routes. A flash of reflection from a knife hilt caught the flare light, and Tommy flinched. He could almost feel the tension in that single soldier's muscles, the unspoken curse at losing the advantage of night. The Americans were coordinating with rapid precision. Men shouted orders, repeated signals, and reinforced positions along terraces. Even in the confusion, the chain of command held. Flares hissed, illuminating the grove in staccato bursts of light. Shadows moved like living things, and the soldiers adapted with a deadly rhythm. Tommy realized he could hear more than just movement. He heard decision-making in real time, the snap of thought into action. Sergeant Caldwell barked, "Cover the terraces, don't let them slip past the walls." Boots shuffled, knees hit the cold stone, muzzles were raised, fingers tightened. Each soldier became an extension of the alert, responding to the invisible enemy with lethal precision. In the shadows, the Germans weighed their options. Their advantage was gone, yet they were far from defeated. One commando signaled with a faint hand gesture. They adjusted, shifting their formation into tighter, more careful lines. Every second mattered. Every sound could betray or protect. They inched forward, crawling across the terraces, their own breaths shallow and controlled. Tommy's heart raced. He had warned them, yes, but now he had to trust that the men on his side would respond fast enough. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping branch, every distant shuffle sent spikes of adrenaline through him. He gripped his rifle tighter, knuckles white against the cold metal. Suddenly, a German soldier froze near the base of a terrace, caught in a flare's harsh light. He looked around, panicked but trained, calculating, and then vanished back into the shadows. Tommy's stomach twisted. That single movement, that hesitation, could have meant a firefight already beginning, but for now it was a warning, a heartbeat of suspense in the grove. Corporal Avery's voice cut through the tension. Left flank, watch the terraces. Right, cover the steps. Men obeyed instantly, racing to positions. The Americans were no longer reacting, they were shaping the battlefield. Flares continued to hiss upward, each one illuminating patches of grove like a strobe, revealing glints of steel, tense faces, and trembling leaves. Tommy could feel the weight of eyes on him, not just his own, but the unseen ones in the darkness. He crouched low, breathing through the cold, listening to the grove, feeling the pulse of the night like a living thing. The commandos were crawling closer, but every inch forward brought them into the harsh light, exposed and vulnerable. Then a low sound, barely perceptible but unmistakable, reached him. A twig snapped underfoot. Someone moved too quickly. Tommy flinched, realizing the Germans had begun a minor adjustment, trying to regroup, trying to find gaps in the American defenses. His stomach tightened. They were calculating, predicting, probing, and the Americans were ready. The night seemed to stretch. Each second carried the potential for sudden violence. Soldiers whispered warnings to each other. Bolts clicked. Flare lights danced across tense faces. Tommy could see Sergeant Caldwell checking corners, rifle sweeping terraces, eyes sharp. Every man was alive to the same urgency, every decision a matter of life or death. Then came a sudden, sharp motion. One German commando had tried to advance along a low terrace, thinking the flares had left shadows unguarded. Avery spotted him instantly. "There, move," he shouted. A flare fired, illuminating the commando mid-step. Tommy saw the German freeze, glance, then retreat under the glare of light. The grove was alive with tension, the silent dance of predator and prey reversed. Tommy's chest pounded. He realized that his voice, his mistake, had set this all in motion. One slip had become a signal, and now every man here, trained, armored, vigilant, was ready. Yet the commandos were relentless, testing lines, probing, looking for weakness. Every shadow could conceal danger, every terrace a potential trap. The wind howled across the grove, carrying the rustle of leaves, the hiss of flares, the distant murmur of soldiers coordinating. Tommy's hands were raw from gripping his rifle. His mind raced with scenarios. If they attack now, if they wait, if they try to circle around. The uncertainty was suffocating. Then, from somewhere deeper in the grove, a metallic scrape rang out. A soldier, a German, shifting against stone. Tommy's stomach lurched. Every man tensed further, bolsters readied. The Americans responded with instinct honed by training, raising rifles to terraces, signaling each other silently. And then another sound, this one deliberate, measured. The commandos were communicating, moving to adjust positions, trying to regain control. The grove vibrated with tension. Every second stretched into a lifetime. Tommy's pulse thundered in his ears. He understood suddenly the fragile balance of war. One wrong move could collapse the night into chaos. 1 second too slow, one soldier misaligned, and this alert could become a firefight that no one survived. Yet the Americans held. Every man was in position. Every line was covered. The flares cut through darkness like blades of light. And yet the Germans were still out there, still calculating, still crawling, every motion deliberate, every shadow a threat. Tommy's mind replayed the moment his rifle had slipped. One mistake, one voice had bought time, but time could run out at any moment. The grove waited, the shadows shifted. The first shots were still somewhere beyond reach, but the night had changed. What would have been a massacre became a tense standoff, a battle of light and shadow, instinct and training, fear and courage. Tommy stayed pressed low against the wall, heart hammering, watching the olive trees quiver under flare light, waiting for the next move in a deadly game where even seconds could mean life or death. The night held its breath, and somewhere in the shadows, the Germans were deciding whether to strike or retreat. The grove had been transformed. Flares sliced through the night, jagged beams of white that lit terraces, olive trees, and the stone walls like stark theatrical sets. Shadows leapt, danced, and receded, as if the night itself was holding its breath, watching the coming clash unfold. Tommy crouched behind his low stone wall, knuckles white on the M1 Garand. The adrenaline coursing through him made his hands tremble uncontrollably, yet he gripped the rifle as if it were a lifeline, and in a sense it was. Every rustle of leaves made him flinch. Every snapping branch felt like a gunshot. His mind kept replaying the moment he had dropped the rifle, that single clang echoing in the stillness like a death knell. He had no idea what the consequences might have been if he had stayed silent. But now, watching trained soldiers move with lethal precision, he understood the impact. One boy, one voice, had changed the course of a night that could have ended in carnage. Sergeant Henry Caldwell barked orders, moving from position to position. "Hold the terraces, watch the shadows, don't let them flank us." His voice carried through the grove, slicing through the tension like a blade. Soldiers responded instantly, rifles scanning terraces, bayonets glinting, hands steady despite the cold and the fear. Flares hissed overhead, illuminating the grove in sharp bursts, painting every olive tree, every terrace in stark relief. Tommy's gaze flicked to the shadows between terraces. He saw the German Brandenburger commandos, elite and deadly, shifting silently, trying to find weaknesses. They were out of their element now, forced to react rather than dictate, but they were far from powerless. One soldier crouched low, eyes calculating escape routes, muscles coiled like springs, ready to strike if the opportunity presented itself. Then it happened. A faint metallic scrape. A German commando had misjudged the flare's angle and brushed against a stone terrace. The sound was small, but in the tense silence it was amplified tenfold. Tommy froze, pulse hammering. Across the grove, an American soldier, Private Daniels, spotted the movement. "There, on the left terrace," he shouted. The response was immediate. Flare guns hissed, spitting light into the grove, revealing a dark shape slithering across the stone. Soldiers raised their rifles, bolts clicking, eyes narrowing, hearts hammering. Tommy felt his stomach twist. This was the moment it could all collapse. One shot fired too soon, one hesitation, and chaos would erupt. The first shots rang out, cutting through the night. Rifle fire cracked like lightning, sharp and unforgiving. The Germans returned fire, short bursts, careful and calculated, testing the Americans' lines. Every shot illuminated flashes in the grove, silhouettes moving between terraces, rifles swinging, shadows darting across olive branches. Tommy's ears rang with the sound, every crack of gunfire vibrating through his bones. He stayed low, scanning the terraces, trying to track every movement. One commando had tried to advance along a low wall, but a flare caught him mid-step. Tommy saw the man freeze, hand tightening on a rifle, muscles taut with tension. The Americans were reacting with deadly precision. One coordinated volley forced the German back, and the grove erupted in bursts of flare and gunfire, a deadly dance of light and shadow. Tommy realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. Men older, trained, and experienced were moving with instinctive precision, responding to danger as if their bodies had memorized it. Yet the fear in him, raw, unfiltered, and entirely human, reminded him he was only 16. One wrong move, one misjudgment, and this night could become a tomb. From his vantage point, he could see Sergeant Caldwell coordinating, running between positions, barking orders, adjusting defenses. Every terrace was manned, every flank covered. The Americans had transformed from passive targets into a living, breathing defensive network. And yet, the Germans were relentless. They probed, adjusted, and tried to find a gap. A sudden movement on the right flank caught Tommy's eye. A German soldier had crept past a low wall, thinking the flare light had missed him. Tommy's pulse surged. He raised the Garand instinctively, aiming where he could see the shadow. A shot rang out, followed by a scream, and the soldier dropped lifeless. Tommy's hands shook, but he didn't lower the rifle. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, the knowledge that one act of courage or one mistake could tip the balance. The grove was alive with noise now. Shouts, gunfire, the hiss of flares, the rustle of leaves underfoot. Tommy's ears rang, his heart pounded, his eyes darted from shadow to shadow. Every flare revealed movement, every flash of steel drew a reaction. He felt the rhythm of the battle, a terrifying, hypnotic cadence of fear and precision. Sergeant Caldwell moved past him, slapping a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "You did good, Reynolds. Keep your head down and keep watching." The words were brief, but they struck Tommy like a blow. He had saved lives, but the night was far from over. Another flare erupted above the grove. Shadows shifted again. Tommy could see more Brandenburger commandos crawling, retreating, repositioning. They were calculating, weighing every step. The Americans fired in short, disciplined bursts, keeping them from gaining ground. One commando tried to circle around, but a shout rang out, followed by rifle fire. He fell, disappearing into the shadows. Tommy realized the battle was not about brute force. It was about timing, precision, and instinct. Every soldier's decision mattered, every heartbeat counted, and his own choice to raise the alarm was the spark that had set this deadly rhythm into motion. Minutes stretched into eternity. Every flare revealed new threats. Every shadow could conceal a killer. The olive groves, silent and foreboding before, were now alive with movement, with danger, with a deadly energy that Tommy had never felt before. Then a sound, a low, deliberate whistle from the German side. A signal. Tommy froze. He realized they were coordinating, trying to regain the initiative, testing the Americans' lines, searching for gaps. His stomach twisted. Every movement, every breath, every second was a test of courage and instinct. The Americans held their positions. The Germans probed, retreated, and probed again. Gunfire cracked in the night, mingling with shouts and the hiss of flares. Tommy stayed low, heart racing, eyes scanning the shadows. One misstep, one hesitation, and the balance could collapse. And then, through the chaos, Tommy saw it, a German soldier trying to break through the left flank, moving too fast, too confident. He raised his Garand and fired. The shot rang out, echoing across the terraces, and the soldier crumpled into the darkness. The grove fell silent for a heartbeat. The balance had shifted. The Americans had held. The commandos, exposed and outmaneuvered, retreated into the darkness, their carefully planned ambush unraveling. Tommy sank against the wall, chest heaving, limbs trembling, adrenaline coursing through every vein. He had survived. The soldiers around him had survived. And it had all begun with one dropped rifle, one instinctive decision, one voice raised in the dark. Yet the night was far from over. More movement could be out there, more danger waiting. Tommy's pulse slowed slightly, but he remained alert, rifle ready, watching the grove, feeling every heartbeat, every shadow, every breath. The first firefight had been survived, but it was only the beginning. The grove was quiet again, but not peaceful. Flares still hung in the air like fading stars, sputtering and casting ghostly shadows over the terraces and olive trees. The echoes of gunfire lingered in the hills, bouncing off stone walls and leaving a ringing in every soldier's ears. Tommy Reynolds pressed himself against the low wall, chest heaving, hands still gripping his M1 Garand. He could barely process what had just happened. Around him, men moved cautiously, checking corners, scanning terraces, whispering warnings. Private Daniels wiped sweat and blood from his brow, glancing over at Tommy with a half-grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Guess that rifle clang did more than scare the birds," he muttered. Tommy managed a weak smile, too exhausted to speak. Sergeant Caldwell approached, rifle still at the ready, eyes scanning the grove. "Hold your positions," he said, voice low but firm. "They're retreating for now, but that doesn't mean it's over. Keep your eyes open." He clapped a hand on Tommy's shoulder, a rare touch of reassurance. "You did good, real good." Tommy's stomach was still tight with adrenaline, but the words sank in. He had saved lives. He had prevented an ambush. And yet he felt no triumph, no celebration. Only the weight of what could have happened, what almost had happened, and the knowledge that the night was far from over. The retreating Germans moved with cautious precision. Shadows slipped back into the olive groves, disappearing behind terraces, leaving the Americans to slowly regain control of the grove. The hiss of flares died down, replaced by the soft murmur of soldiers regrouping. Tommy watched as Sergeant Caldwell signaled the men to check positions, sweep the terraces, and account for every corner of the grove. Every movement felt deliberate, measured. The Americans had survived, but they could not afford to relax. The commandos were elite, trained to strike and vanish. They might return in greater numbers, they might wait until dawn, or they might have already set traps further along the line. Tommy lowered his rifle slightly, breathing in the cold night air, tasting the metallic tang of adrenaline and fear. His mind wandered briefly to home, to the farmhouse in Iowa, to the fields he had left behind, to the simple life that now felt impossibly distant. and then he forced himself back to the present. Survival was here, in the groves, under the flares, against shadows that could kill. Corporal Avery moved past him, checking the terraces with a sharp eye. "Left flanks clear," he reported. "Right still tense, but no sign of movement." His voice was steady, but Tommy could see the tightness in his jaw, the awareness that danger might still be lurking, waiting for a chance. The soldiers began to settle, cautiously at first. Bolts were secured, rifles cleaned and reloaded, flares checked and replaced. Yet the tension lingered, a palpable presence in the grove. Tommy realized that even in retreat, the Germans had left their mark, the fear of what could have happened if he had stayed silent. He thought about the first moments, the dropped rifle, the metallic clang that had shattered the night. The sound had seemed catastrophic at the time, a fatal mistake, but it had revealed the hidden threat, forcing both sides into action and ultimately saving lives. Tommy's mind raced with the paradox. The very act that could have doomed them had instead been the catalyst for survival. A soft rustle in the grove drew his attention. He froze, scanning the terraces, the olive trees, the shadows. Another soldier whispered a warning, rifle raised. Tommy's pulse quickened, but it was only a stray branch moving in the wind. The tension, he realized, would not leave him tonight, or perhaps ever. Sergeant Caldwell gathered the men near the center of the grove. "Good work holding your positions," he said, voice carrying over the quiet. "You stayed alert, you stayed alive, and you made sure your brothers survived. Remember that, but this is a war, and war doesn't end with a single firefight. Stay sharp." Tommy felt the weight of those words. They were not just instructions, they were a reminder that vigilance never ended, that survival depended on constant awareness, on instincts honed and sharpened by experience. And somehow, in that moment, he understood that his mistake had been a lesson in that very instinct. He lowered himself to the ground, shivering in the cold. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a trembling exhaustion that settled deep into his bones. Around him, soldiers whispered, laughed nervously, and shared quiet observations about the firefight. Some cursed the Germans for their audacity. Some cursed the cold. But all of them, he realized, owed their lives to a decision that had come instinctively, without orders, without calculation. Tommy's thoughts drifted to the future, to what might have happened if he had been afraid to speak. The idea made his stomach churn, and yet he could also feel a strange pride, a fragile, quiet sense that even in fear he had acted. He had trusted something beyond training, beyond orders, something raw and human, and it had worked. The grove gradually began to calm, the flares dimming, shadows stretching longer as the night deepened. Soldiers began to relax, though never fully. They checked their positions, reloaded rifles, and shared quiet reassurances. Tommy remained pressed against the stone wall, hands still gripping his rifle, eyes never leaving the darkened terraces. A distant owl called, a single mournful note in the cold night. Tommy's thoughts returned to the battle, to the commandos now slipping into the darkness, to the line of soldiers who might have been ambushed. He thought about the strange interplay of mistake and instinct, of fear and action, and he realized that in war, moments were fragile, and every decision carried weight far beyond what anyone could predict. Sergeant Caldwell moved past him one last time, checking lines, muttering instructions, and then signaling the men to hold their positions for the remainder of the night. "Stay alert. Dawn isn't far, but danger doesn't sleep. Not here, not in this grove." Tommy lowered his head slightly, closing his eyes for a brief moment, letting the exhaustion wash over him. His body ached, his mind raced, but beneath it all, a quiet realization settled in. A mistake, a simple slip of the hand, had saved lives tonight. And that, in itself, was both terrifying and extraordinary. The olive groves were quiet again, but the memory of the firefight lingered in every shadow, every terrace, every rustle of leaves. Tommy knew that even though the immediate danger had passed, the night, and the war was far from over. And he also knew that instinct, courage, and the willingness to act in the face of fear could tip the balance in ways that orders and training alone could not. As the hours crept toward dawn, the grove seemed to settle into a tense calm. Soldiers kept watch, rifles ready, eyes scanning shadows for any sign of movement. Tommy leaned back against the stone wall, rifle in hand, heart still racing, mind replaying every second of the firefight. The lesson of the night was clear. In war, a single act, whether mistake or instinct, could change everything. And Tommy Reynolds, 16 years old, had just learned that lesson in the most brutal way possible. The grove waited, the shadows lingered, and somewhere in the distance, the wind carried a reminder that the night was not truly over. The first pale fingers of dawn crept over the olive groves, brushing terraces and gnarled trees with cold light. Mist hung low in the valleys, curling around stones and roots like the breath of the earth itself. The night had passed, leaving behind the scent of smoke, gunpowder, and cold sweat, a tangible memory of fear and survival. Tommy Reynolds lowered himself from his stone wall, knees stiff from crouching all night. His M1 Garand still felt heavy in his hands, though the tension had shifted from adrenaline to exhaustion. Around him, the men of his unit began to emerge from the shadows, stretching stiff limbs, blinking against the growing light, checking each other for injuries. Sergeant Caldwell moved through the grove with quiet authority, eyes scanning terraces and shadows that were now softened by the early light. "Check positions, report casualties, account for every corner," he ordered. The men obeyed methodically, rifles slung, faces pale and drawn from the night's tension. Tommy followed, shoulders aching, boots crunching on frost-hardened earth. He could feel the grove changing as the sun rose, every terrace and tree bathed in clarity that the flares of night had only briefly hinted at. Yet the beauty of the olive groves did little to erase the memory of shadows, of movement, of the fear that had clutched at him just hours before. Corporal Avery approached, wiping dirt and sweat from his uniform. "You okay, Reynolds?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Tommy nodded, but the words felt hollow. He was not entirely okay. He had seen what one small mistake could trigger, had felt the weight of responsibility pressing down like stone. But he was alive. The men around him were alive, and somehow that was enough. The grove was eerily quiet now. The Brandenburger commandos had vanished into the hills, their plans thwarted by a single metallic clang, a raised voice, and the immediate action of American soldiers. Tommy thought about that. One slip, one instinct, had saved lives that would otherwise have been lost. And yet he felt no pride, only a quiet, hollow understanding of how close death had been. He walked along the terraces, taking in the aftermath. The ground was littered with leaves, broken branches, and the marks of hurried movement. Flare casings lay scattered, blackened against the frost. A few small craters from rifle fire dotted the earth, reminders that bullets had traveled, that lives had been at risk. And yet no man from his unit had fallen. Sergeant Caldwell crouched beside a low wall studying the ground. "They were clever," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Trained, disciplined, but they underestimated our alertness. That's what saved us. You did well, all of you." His gaze fell on Tommy, lingering for a moment. "You, Reynolds, don't think this goes unnoticed." Tommy's throat tightened. Words felt inadequate. He had acted instinctively, without thought of glory or recognition. And now, in the quiet of dawn, he realized the enormity of what had happened. A single moment, fear turned to action, had altered the course of a battle. The men began surveying the grove more thoroughly, checking terraces for signs of return or hidden threats. Tommy followed cautiously, noting each step, each movement. Even in daylight, the grove held secrets, shadows behind walls, gaps between trees, narrow terraces where an enemy could have hidden. The fear of the night lingered, a silent reminder that war demanded constant vigilance. Private Daniels came up beside him, crouching to inspect a faint track in the soil. "Looks like they pulled back," he said, "but who knows if they're regrouping somewhere?" His voice carried a mix of relief and unease. Tommy nodded, understanding completely. The Germans had retreated, yes, but they were not gone. Ambushes were never one-time events. The war, he realized, was a series of calculated risks and split-second decisions. Tommy's gaze drifted to the terraces he had watched so carefully the night before. Every stone, every tree, every shadow was a testament to the fragile balance between life and death. He remembered the clang of his rifle, the instant panic, the choice to raise the alarm. One mistake, one instinct, one voice. And suddenly, dozens of lives were spared. He knelt beside a patch of disturbed soil, tracing a small indentation left by a German boot. The thought struck him again. One small error had exposed an entire ambush, but that same error, combined with the Americans' response, had saved them. It was a paradox, cruel and beautiful, terrifying and instructive. Sergeant Caldwell gathered the men for a brief debrief. The enemy is retreating, positions are secure, but remember this, war doesn't end at dawn, it's a constant test, and vigilance is your greatest weapon. The men nodded, eyes scanning the groves, shoulders still tense, rifles at the ready. Tommy leaned against the low wall, exhaustion finally weighing on him. He had survived a night where shadows had moved, death had almost struck, and instinct had been the only thing standing between life and catastrophe. He realized that mistakes, courage, fear, and quick thinking were all intertwined in ways he had never understood. The sun continued to rise, illuminating the grove in soft light. Olive trees swayed gently in the morning breeze, and frost glinted like scattered diamonds on terraces and stones. The beauty of the landscape contrasted sharply with the terror of the night, and Tommy felt a strange, quiet awe. War had shown him the extremes of human experience, the fragility of life, the sharp edge of fear, and the unexpected power of instinct. As the soldiers began organizing their gear, checking weapons, and sharing quiet conversation, Tommy sat back against the stone wall. He let the weight of the night sink in, every heartbeat a reminder of what had been at stake. His mistake, dropping the rifle, had been a catalyst. His instinct, raising the alarm, had saved lives. And yet he understood that survival in war was never about heroics. It was about awareness, readiness, and trust in one's own judgment. A faint sound in the distance made him sit up again, an echo of movement in the hills, perhaps a bird, perhaps a returning scout. He raised his eyes, scanning terraces and olive groves, aware that the world was still dangerous, still alive with potential threats. But now there was sunlight. Now there was clarity. The shadows of night had receded, revealing the terrain in all its complexity. Tommy looked at the men around him, older, more experienced, hardened by combat. And yet they had all relied on him, even unknowingly, to provide the critical warning that had changed the night. The thought settled in his mind like a stone. Even a boy, even a mistake, could tip the scales in war. Sergeant Caldwell's voice broke through his thoughts. "Reynolds, stay with me for a moment." Tommy walked over, still gripping his rifle. Feeling the tremor of adrenaline lingering in his limbs, the sergeant nodded toward the grove. "You understand the weight of what happened, don't you? That single act, it changed everything." Tommy nodded. Words failed him. The truth was too heavy, too immediate, too visceral. He had learned in one night the razor-thin line between life and death, the power of instinct, and the responsibility that came with being alive when others depended on you. The sun rose higher, bathing the grove in a golden, cold light. Shadows retreated to their corners, revealing terraces, stones, and olive trees untouched by the chaos of night. Tommy Reynolds, 16 years old, leaned against the stone wall, rifle across his lap, reflecting on the night that had tested him, challenged him, and ultimately spared countless lives. The grove was quiet, but Tommy knew the lessons of that night would echo for the rest of his life. Mistakes could kill, but courage, even in its most instinctive form, could save. Decisions, made in fear and doubt, could define moments and determine destinies. And the night, with its shadows and flares, had been a crucible that forged understanding in a boy who had faced the abyss and acted. He looked out over the terraces, over the olive trees, over the grove now calm under the morning light. The battle had been avoided, the ambush prevented, and the soldiers of the American unit were alive because of a simple human choice: to act. Tommy closed his eyes for a brief moment, feeling the frost on the stone wall, the wind in the olive branches, the quiet aftermath of violence and survival. He had survived the night, and he had learned what it truly meant to make a difference. The grove waited, alive with the memory of what had been and what could have been. And Tommy Reynolds, 16 years old, knew that instinct, courage, and awareness could change the course of a battle, even when the world seemed dark and the shadows long. The sun rose fully over the Gustav line, and for the first time that night, Tommy allowed himself a deep, steady breath. The battle had been averted, the ambush had failed, and the night, though terrifying, had taught him the weight of a single moment.